Top 10 toughest actors in Golden Age Hollywood history. When you think of Hollywood's Golden Age, you might imagine the glamour of red carpets, the opulence of lavish premieres, and the carefully crafted personas created by powerful studios. But behind many of those dashing smiles and debonair suits were men who knew real violence, true hardship, and genuine courage long before they ever stepped in front of a camera. These weren't actors pretending to be tough. They were tough men who happened to become actors. The bullets they dodged weren't blanks. The wars they fought weren't choreographed. The scars they carried weren't makeup. Today, we're counting down the 10 toughest actors from Hollywood's Golden Age, men whose real lives contained more danger, heroism, and raw grit than any script could ever invent. And wait until you hear about number 1. His story is so extraordinary that Hollywood literally couldn't make it up if they tried. Before we dive into our countdown, let's understand what we mean by tough. We're not just talking about actors who played tough guys on screen, though many on our list certainly did. We're talking about men who demonstrated extraordinary physical courage, mental resilience, and unbreakable spirit in their real lives. The Golden Age of Hollywood overlapped with some of the most turbulent decades of the 20th century: the Great Depression, World War II, the early Cold War. Many actors didn't just witness these events. They lived through their darkest moments. They grew up in poverty, fought on the front lines, suffered life-threatening injuries, and carried those experiences into their performances. What's remarkable is how different Hollywood was back then. Today, we're accustomed to actors training for roles, putting on muscle, learning combat techniques, adopting specialized diets. But for many on our list, this process worked in reverse. Their real-life experiences gave their performances a hardened authenticity that no amount of modern preparation could replicate. So sit back as we explore the fascinating true stories behind Hollywood's genuinely toughest leading men. Stories of battlefield heroics, prison escapes, bare-knuckle brawls, and the kind of resilience that can't be faked, no matter how talented the actor.
It shows you what a good actor I am, because I really am the sweetest. Come on.
10. Kirk Douglas. We begin our countdown with the man who literally fought his way from poverty to become one of Hollywood's most enduring stars, Kirk Douglas. Long before he was swinging swords in Spartacus or squaring off against John Wayne in The War Wagon, Douglas was Ishur Danilowitz, the son of Jewish immigrants from what is now Belarus. His father was an illiterate ragman who collected and sold scrap to support his family in Amsterdam, New York. Young Ishur grew up in a home where hunger wasn't an acting exercise. It was a daily reality. "We lived in a poor section of town called the Bowery," Douglas later recalled. "We were the poorest family on a poor block." The future star sometimes had to scavenge for food in garbage cans to help feed his 6 sisters. But Douglas possessed a fierce determination that poverty couldn't extinguish. To escape his circumstances, he discovered 2 paths forward: wrestling and acting. On the wrestling mat, he could channel his raw physical power. In acting, he found a way to transform his hardscrabble experiences into art. Douglas wrestled his way into St. Lawrence University, working dozens of odd jobs to pay his tuition. After graduating, he was accepted into the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, where his classmate Lauren Bacall would later help launch his film career. But before Hollywood came calling, World War II intervened. Douglas enlisted in the United States Navy in 1941, serving as a communications officer aboard the USS 1139, a submarine chaser. While his service wasn't as decorated as some others on our list, he faced the very real dangers of Atlantic warfare during the height of the German U-boat campaign. After the war, Douglas brought an unmistakable intensity to the screen that directors quickly recognized. His breakthrough role in Champion, 1949, where he played a ruthless boxer, wasn't much of a stretch for a man who had been fighting, literally and figuratively, his entire life. "I've always been attracted to characters who are part scoundrel," Douglas once said. "I've never been interested in playing the perfectly straight, bland leading man." What made Douglas particularly tough, however, was his longevity and resilience. In 1991, he survived a helicopter crash that killed 2 other people. In 1996, at age 80, he suffered a severe stroke that left him with impaired speech. Many would have retreated from public life, but Douglas fought back through years of speech therapy, returning to the screen in the 1999 film Diamonds. He continued writing books, including one about his stroke recovery aptly titled My Stroke of Luck. He lived to the astonishing age of 103, remaining mentally sharp and physically active well past his 100th birthday. His son Michael Douglas once observed, "He's a hard act to follow." Kirk Douglas never lost the toughness forged in those early days of poverty. "Life is like a B-movie," he once quipped. "You don't want to leave in the middle of it, but you don't want to see it again." Douglas stayed for the entire feature, 103 years of fighting, surviving, and never backing down.
Was something happen?
Tell us about this buddy of yours.
Yes, sir. Well,
9. Robert Ryan. When you watch Robert Ryan on screen, particularly in his many villain roles, there's a physical credibility to his menace that can't be faked. That authenticity came from real experience. Ryan was the heavyweight boxing champion at Dartmouth College for 4 consecutive years in the late 1930s. Born in Chicago in 1909 to a wealthy Irish-American family, Ryan's early life was comfortable, but the Great Depression wiped out the family fortune, teaching young Robert early lessons about life's unpredictability. To help pay for his education at Dartmouth, he took a series of grueling jobs, working on a cattle ranch, on ships, and as a sandhog, tunnel digger, for Chicago's sewer system. But it was in the boxing ring where Ryan first distinguished himself. Standing 6 feet 4 inches with a powerful build, he dominated collegiate competition, developing the physical confidence that would later make his screen performances so convincing. Even decades later, watching Ryan in films like The Setup, 1949, where he plays an aging boxer, you can see the authentic way he moves, the footwork and the punching technique of someone who actually knows how to fight. When World War II erupted, Ryan enlisted in the Marine Corps. He didn't see combat, but his experience as a drill instructor at Camp Pendleton was equally formative. For 3 years, he shaped raw recruits into Marines, developing a command presence that would serve him well on screen. "I learned more about acting from being a Marine Corps drill instructor than from any acting class," Ryan once said. He understood authority, intimidation, and how to project power, skills that made him one of Hollywood's most convincing tough guys. What made Ryan particularly interesting was the contrast between his screen persona and his private beliefs. Despite frequently playing bigots, violent criminals, and corrupt cops, Ryan was a committed progressive who championed civil rights and opposed the Hollywood blacklist during the McCarthy era. He co-founded the Hollywood chapter of SANE, a national anti-nuclear organization, and actively supported various social justice causes. This principled stance required its own kind of toughness during the repressive 1950s. While many in Hollywood remained silent, Ryan spoke out, risking his career in the process. Director Anthony Mann, who worked with Ryan on Men at War, once observed, "Bob Ryan can hit harder with one quiet, level look than most actors can with a drawn gun and a scream." That quiet intensity made him perfect for film noir and westerns, where he could convey menace without histrionics. Perhaps Ryan's toughness is best summarized by his approach to one of his finest roles, as the bigoted soldier in Crossfire, 1947. When asked how he could play such a reprehensible character with such conviction, Ryan replied, "I know that character because I've felt those feelings. I've been that angry and that blind, but I've learned to channel it." That self-awareness, recognizing the capacity for darkness within himself, showed a different kind of toughness, moral courage. Robert Ryan brought an intellectual depth to his tough guy roles that set him apart from his contemporaries. He wasn't just playing at being tough, he had lived it, from the boxing ring to the Marine Corps, and brought that experience to every role.
Sorts of places, all over Europe in different languages, singing, acting.
8. Christopher Lee. Long before he wielded a lightsaber as Count Dooku or commanded the dark forces of Mordor as Saruman, Christopher Lee was fighting real battles against real evil as a member of Britain's elite Special Operations Executive, SOE, during World War II. Born to a distinguished military family in 1922, Lee was raised in privilege, attending Wellington College before the war changed everything. When Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the 17-year-old Lee volunteered to fight for Finland against the Soviet invasion. While he didn't see combat there, it was just the beginning of his wartime service. In 1941, Lee joined the Royal Air Force, but was unable to fly combat missions due to a problem with his optic nerve. Frustrated by his grounding, he found another way to fight, volunteering for the SOE, Winston Churchill's secret organization charged with conducting espionage, sabotage, and reconnaissance behind enemy lines. Their work was so classified that the organization was known as Churchill's Secret Army, or the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. The full extent of Lee's activities with the SOE remains classified even decades later, but we know he operated in North Africa and Italy, liaisoned with resistance fighters, and was attached to the Special Air Service SAS for a time. His perfect command of French, Italian, and German made him invaluable for intelligence work. Lee rarely discussed specifics of his wartime activities, maintaining the secrecy he had sworn to uphold, but occasionally he would hint at the gravity of his experiences. During the filming of The Lord of the Rings, he famously corrected director Peter Jackson on what sound a man makes when stabbed in the back. "Have you any idea what kind of noise happens when somebody's stabbed in the back?" Lee reportedly asked Jackson. "Because I do." The director wisely took the veteran's advice. By war's end, Lee had been decorated for his service by the Czech, Yugoslav, Polish, and British governments. He had witnessed the horrors of the Nazi concentration camps firsthand while attached to the Central Registry of War Criminals and Security Suspects, hunting down Nazi war criminals. "I've seen many men die right in front of me, so many in fact that I've become almost hardened to it," Lee later recalled. Having seen the worst that human beings can do to each other, the results of torture, mutilation, and seeing someone blown to pieces by a bomb, you develop a kind of shell. But you had to. You had to. This shell, this hardened experience, gave Lee's performances, particularly his villains, a chilling authenticity. When he played Dracula or Francisco Scaramanga in The Man with the Golden Gun, there was real menace behind those piercing eyes, the kind that comes only from having seen genuine evil. After the war, Lee's path to acting was far from direct. He worked as an intelligence officer hunting Nazi war criminals, then in various desk jobs before a cousin suggested he try acting. Standing 6 feet 5 inches with a commanding presence and resonant voice, Lee was initially cast in supporting roles, often as the villain. It would take decades for him to achieve the stardom his talent deserved. Christopher Lee's toughness wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He carried the secrets and scars of war throughout his life, channeling those dark experiences into performances of unforgettable intensity. In his autobiography, he wrote, "I've fought hand to hand in my time. I've seen men die and I've killed men." That wasn't movie talk. It was the hard truth from a man who had lived through humanity's darkest chapter before creating memorable monsters on screen.
I was a little worried about it.
7. James Stewart. When we think of James Stewart, we often picture the stammering, earnest everyman from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, or the despondent George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. His aw-shucks persona and lanky frame didn't immediately suggest physical toughness, but appearances can be deceiving, and few actors in Hollywood history demonstrated more moral and physical courage than Stewart. Before Pearl Harbor, Stewart was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, having won an Academy Award for The Philadelphia Story. He could have easily secured a comfortable stateside position in the military or continued making morale-boosting films. Instead, he insisted on combat duty. Already a licensed pilot before the war, Stewart enlisted in the Army Air Corps in March 1941, 9 months before America officially entered the conflict. Initially rejected for being underweight, he stuffed himself with bananas and steaks to make the minimum requirement. From the beginning, Stewart refused special treatment. He earned his way up from private to colonel through genuine merit, becoming one of the few Americans to rise from enlisted rank to field grade officer during the war. By January 1944, he was commanding the 703rd Bombardment Squadron, personally leading bombing missions over Nazi Germany. These weren't ceremonial flights. Stewart flew the B-24 Liberator, a notoriously difficult aircraft to handle, through heavy enemy fire. He didn't send his men where he wouldn't go himself, eventually flying 20 dangerous combat missions when the average airman was rotated home after 25 if he survived them. The statistical odds were grim. The 8th Air Force, where Stewart served, suffered nearly 50% casualties. "Fear is an insidious thing," Stewart later said of his combat experience. "It can warp judgment, freeze reflexes, breed mistakes, and worse, it's contagious." Yet he conquered that fear mission after mission, demonstrating the quiet courage that defined both his military service and his finest screen performances. By the war's end, Stewart had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Air Medal with 3 Oak Leaf Clusters, and the French Croix de Guerre. He remained in the Air Force Reserve after the war, eventually rising to the rank of Brigadier General, the highest military rank achieved by any actor in American history. What makes Stewart's story particularly remarkable is what happened after the war. He returned to Hollywood deeply changed by his experiences. Friends noted he had aged beyond his years, lost weight, and suffered from what we now recognize as PTSD. He experienced tremors, nightmares, and found it difficult to talk about the war. When Frank Capra cast him in It's a Wonderful Life, Stewart was unsure if he could still act, but the role of George Bailey, a man wrestling with despair and questioning the value of his life, resonated with Stewart's post-war state of mind. The famous scene where George contemplates suicide on a bridge wasn't just acting, it drew from Stewart's real emotional struggles. Film historian Robert Mattson observed, "When you watch It's a Wonderful Life, you're watching Jimmy Stewart's nervous breakdown. That raw emotional authenticity gave his performance a depth that might not have been possible without his war experiences." Stewart remained in the Air Force Reserve until 1968, when he retired as a brigadier general. When asked about his extraordinary military accomplishments, Stewart typically downplayed his heroism. "I had been in the business of pretending to be somebody else, and I wanted to find out who I was." What he found was that beneath the gentle exterior was a man of exceptional courage and resilience, qualities that informed his post-war performances and gave them a depth that transcended his pre-war work. Jimmy Stewart wasn't just playing tough men on screen, he was one, having proven it in the skies over Nazi Germany.
This man owes you an apology.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything.
6. Jack Palance. With his hollow cheeks, intimidating stare, and imposing 6'4" frame, Jack Palance didn't have to convince anyone he was tough. His very presence did that for him. But the face that launched 1,000 screen villains wasn't the result of fortunate genetics or method acting. It was literally forged in fire. Born Volodymyr Polachniuk to Ukrainian immigrant parents in Pennsylvania coal country, Palance knew hard work from an early age. His father worked in the mines, and young Jack followed him underground at age 16. The experience left him determined to find another path. That path initially led to the boxing ring. Before World War II, Palance fought professionally under the name Jack Brazzo, compiling an impressive record of 15 wins with 12 knockouts before deciding that getting punched in the face wasn't his long-term career plan. His boxing experience, however, gave him an authenticity in roles like the washed-up fighter in Requiem for a Heavyweight. When World War II erupted, Palance enlisted in the Army Air Forces in 1942. He was trained as a bomber pilot, flying B-24 Liberators. In 1943, Palance's military career, and nearly his life, came to a catastrophic end when his bomber experienced engine failure during a training mission. The aircraft crashed and exploded. Palance suffered severe burns, requiring extensive reconstructive surgery that left him with his distinctively taut, angular facial features. Reports that he required plastic surgery spread throughout Hollywood, though Palance later downplayed the extent of his injuries. What's certain is that the crash left him with physical and psychological scars that informed his later performances. After the war, Palance used his GI Bill benefits to study drama, initially performing on stage before transitioning to film. His breakthrough came playing a hired assassin in Sudden Fear, 1952, followed by his iconic role as the gunslinger Jack Wilson in Shane, 1953. In both performances, Palance conveyed menace without exaggeration, a cold, calculating danger that felt absolutely real. Director George Stevens cast him in Shane precisely because Palance had what Stevens called extraordinary physical credibility. When Palance faced off against Alan Ladd in the film's climactic gunfight, audiences had no trouble believing this lean, scarred man was a deadly killer. Throughout his career, Palance brought that same physical authenticity to dozens of roles, from gunslingers to warriors to crime bosses. He was never less than convincing as a dangerous man because he had lived through genuine danger. Perhaps the most memorable demonstration of Palance's lifelong toughness came at the 1992 Academy Awards. At age 73, while accepting the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for City Slickers, Palance dropped to the floor and performed several one-armed push-ups on stage, proving he was still fitter than actors half his age. The spontaneous show of strength brought the house down and rejuvenated his career. "That's nothing," he told the stunned audience after springing back to his feet. "I do 2 hours of exercise every morning, 100 push-ups, 100 chin-ups, 100 knee bends." Given his history, no one doubted him. Jack Palance brought something to the screen that couldn't be faked. The weathered experience of a man who had worked in coal mines, fought in boxing rings, survived a fiery plane crash, and lived to tell the tale. When he intimidated audiences as a villain or impressed them with septuagenarian push-ups, he wasn't acting tough. He was simply being himself.
I'm praying for rain in California.
5. Robert Mitchum. If Hollywood's tough guys existed on a spectrum from method actors playing tough to genuinely tough men who happen to act, Robert Mitchum would be firmly at the latter end of the scale. With his sleepy eyes, laconic delivery, and couldn't-care-less attitude, Mitchum didn't just play cool, he embodied it, both on and off screen. Born in Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1917, Mitchum experienced hardship early when his father was crushed to death in a rail yard accident. By age 14, Mitchum had been expelled from school and was essentially living as a hobo, riding boxcars across the country during the Great Depression. He worked a staggering variety of jobs: ditch digger, coal miner, stevedore, machine operator, and even professional ghostwriter for astrologers. These early experiences included a genuine stint on a Georgia chain gang after being arrested for vagrancy. Mitchum escaped, making him a fugitive until the charges were eventually dismissed. These weren't colorful embellishments added by studio publicists. They were the real experiences of a young man living on the margins of Depression-era America. Mitchum's entry into acting was almost accidental. After settling in Long Beach, California, he began writing poetry and became involved with a local theater group. His sister Julie, already working in film, helped him get work as an extra and bit player. His distinctive physical presence, tall, broad-shouldered, with those heavy-lidded eyes, quickly caught directors' attention. During World War II, Mitchum served in the U.S. Army, working as a medic stationed in the Aleutian Islands. While his military service was less decorated than others on our list, it added to his already considerable life experience. By the time he returned to serious acting after the war, Mitchum had lived more life than most of his contemporaries. His breakthrough came in the 1945 Western The Story of G.I. Joe, earning him his only Oscar nomination. But it was in film noir that Mitchum found his perfect niche. In classics like Out of the Past, 1947, The Night of the Hunter, 1955, and Cape Fear, 1962, his screen presence combined physical threat with psychological complexity. He could be terrifying without raising his voice or making any overt gesture, a skill developed through real-world experience rather than acting classes. Mitchum's off-screen behavior cemented his reputation as Hollywood's authentic bad boy. In 1948, at the height of his early fame, he was arrested for marijuana possession, a major scandal at the time that could have ended his career. Instead of offering public contrition, Mitchum weathered his 60-day jail sentence with characteristic nonchalance, reportedly spending his time cleaning toilets without complaint. When asked about the experience, he shrugged. It's like being in Palm Springs, only without the riffraff. His popularity actually increased after the incident, with audiences appreciating his refusal to fake remorse or engage in image rehabilitation. Throughout his career, Mitchum maintained a refreshing contempt for Hollywood pretension. Asked about his acting technique, he famously replied, "There are two kinds of acting, the look at me school and the look at them school. I prefer to look at them." On another occasion, he summed up his approach even more bluntly. "Listen, I have two kinds of acting, one on a horse and one off a horse. That's it." This wasn't false modesty, it was the perspective of a man who had seen enough of real life to recognize the artifice in Hollywood. He didn't need to method act toughness, he'd lived it. Director Howard Hawks once said of Mitchum, "Mitchum can make the act of lighting a cigarette seem like a military campaign." Off-screen, Mitchum was known for bar fights, practical jokes, and a general disregard for studio rules. Yet colleagues consistently described him as thoroughly professional on set, always punctual, always prepared, always respectful of the crew. The bad boy image cloaked a work ethic forged in his hardscrabble youth. Robert Mitchum's toughness wasn't an act or a persona. It was the genuine article, earned through a youth spent riding the rails, working brutal jobs, escaping a chain gang, and navigating the lower depths of American society. When he played dangerous men on screen, he didn't need to dig deep, he just needed to remember.
There's only one way to find out. Take a walk on Columbus Avenue tonight.
4. Charles Bronson. Long before he became the vigilante Paul Kersey in the Death Wish films, Charles Bronson knew what it meant to fight for survival. Born Charles Bukinski in 1921, he was the 11th of 15 children born to Lithuanian immigrants in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, a coal mining town where poverty wasn't just a concept, but a daily reality. Bronson's father died when he was 10, forcing him to help support the family. At age 16, he followed his older brothers into the coal mines, where he would work for $1 per ton of coal. Later in life, when asked about his famously stoic screen presence, Bronson simply said, "I guess I look like a rock quarry that someone has dynamited." That hardened appearance wasn't makeup or method acting. It was the result of a childhood and adolescence spent in genuine deprivation. Bronson was the first member of his family to graduate high school, an achievement that might seem minor until you understand the crushing pressure to earn money in a family perpetually on the edge of starvation. When World War II erupted, Bronson enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces in 1943. He served as an aerial gunner aboard B-29 Superfortresses in the Pacific Theater, completing 25 combat missions. During one mission, he was wounded in action, receiving a Purple Heart for his service. The experience of war, particularly as a gunner, one of the most dangerous positions on a bomber, added another layer to Bronson's already considerable life experience. By the time he began acting in the early 1950s, Bronson had known poverty, hard labor, and combat, experiences that informed his screen persona in ways no acting class could teach. His rise in Hollywood was far from meteoric. For years, he played small parts, often cast as gangsters, Indians, or other ethnic characters. His Lithuanian heritage and weathered features allowed him to play a variety of ethnicities. He worked steadily, but remained far from stardom throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. International fame came before American recognition. Bronson's taciturn style resonated strongly in Europe, particularly after his role in Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. The French called him Le Sacré Monstre, the sacred monster, while the Italians nicknamed him Il Brutto, the ugly one, terms of endearment for his uncompromising screen presence. By the time Death Wish made him a major American star in 1974, Bronson was already over 50 years old. What made Bronson unique among Hollywood tough guys was his complete lack of pretension or vanity. Unlike some actors who cultivated a tough guy image, Bronson simply was tough, with no need to prove it. Directors noted his willingness to perform his own stunts, even as he entered his 50s and 60s. During the filming of Hard Times, 1975, he performed most of his own boxing scenes despite being 54 years old. Off-screen, Bronson was known for his privacy and professional attitude. Despite his intimidating screen presence, colleagues described him as thoughtful and often unexpectedly gentle. Yet there was always an unmistakable "don't mess with me" aura about him that came from genuine life experience rather than practiced posturing. Perhaps what best illustrates Bronson's authentic toughness is that he never romanticized or glorified his difficult background. When asked about growing up in poverty, he was matter-of-fact. "We were so poor we couldn't even afford to be middle class." About his mining days, he simply said, "I suppose I have a morbid fascination with death underground. It does get to you." Charles Bronson brought to the screen something that couldn't be faked, the weathered experience of a man who had known genuine hardship and danger. When he played men capable of violence, there was no artifice involved. Audiences responded to that authenticity, making him a global star despite his unconventional looks and minimal dialogue. As Roger Ebert once wrote, Charles Bronson looks so wooden that termites probably die of starvation if they try to eat him. Yet that very quality made him utterly believable in his most iconic roles.
70% of you is water.
Oh, God.
And as human beings.
3. Sterling Hayden. If Sterling Hayden had never appeared in a single film, his life would still read like an adventure novel. Sailor, Marine, OSS operative, author, and self-described rebel against Hollywood, Hayden lived with an intensity and authenticity that made his film performances seem almost like afterthoughts in an extraordinary life. Born in Montclair, New Jersey in 1916, Hayden left home at 16 to join the Merchant Marine. By age 22, he had already worked his way up to ship's mate and earned his captain's license, commanding vessels in the Caribbean and along the New England coast. His imposing 6-foot 5-inch frame, blonde hair, and ruggedly handsome features caught the attention of talent scouts while he was working as a fisherman in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Paramount Pictures signed him in 1940, billing him as the most beautiful man in the movies and the beautiful blonde Viking god. Hayden detested the publicity. "The whole picture business was repugnant to me," he later wrote. "I was a sailor. I was a fisherman. But Hayden's brief initial Hollywood career was interrupted by a higher calling. After Pearl Harbor, he abandoned his Paramount contract to join the Marines under the name John Hamilton, an attempt to avoid publicity or special treatment. He was soon recruited into the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA. As an OSS agent, Hayden ran guns through Nazi blockades to Yugoslav partisans, parachuted into fascist-occupied Croatia, and was awarded the Silver Star for his valor behind enemy lines. This wasn't Hollywood heroics. It was genuine wartime courage under extraordinarily dangerous conditions. Hayden worked closely with communist partisan fighters during this period, a connection that would later complicate his post-war life. Returning to Hollywood after the war, Hayden found himself caught up in the Red Scare. His wartime association with communists made him a target for the House Un-American Activities Committee. Under pressure, he testified and named names, a decision he would bitterly regret for the rest of his life, later calling it a massive stroke of cowardice. This moral failure haunted Hayden, but it also deepened his screen performances, particularly in film noir classics like The Asphalt Jungle, 1950, and The Killing, 1956. There was an authenticity to his portrayal of troubled, compromised men that came directly from his own experiences of moral ambiguity. Throughout his career, Hayden maintained a love-hate relationship with Hollywood. "The minute I got a steady acting job, I was ready to run like a thief in the night," he once said. He frequently abandoned acting to go to sea, sometimes for years at a time. In 1959, he even defied a court order during a custody battle, taking his children on his schooner Wanderer for an extended voyage to Tahiti, risking kidnapping charges to live life on his own terms. Hayden's most memorable later roles came in Dr. Strangelove, 1964, as the unhinged General Jack D. Ripper, and in The Godfather, 1972, as the corrupt police captain McCluskey. In both performances, there was a grounded reality that came from Hayden's extraordinary life experience. Unlike other tough guys who carefully maintained their image, Hayden was brutally honest about his flaws and contradictions. In his 1963 autobiography, Wanderer, he wrote with remarkable candor about his alcoholism, his marriages, and his disillusionment with Hollywood. "What confuses me is I ain't all that unhappy. I mean, compare my life to Real Trouble. I got it made. I know it. But I don't know what makes the clock tick, and I don't know why that bothers me." This philosophical depth set Hayden apart from other Hollywood tough guys. He wasn't just physically imposing, he was intellectually restless, constantly questioning his choices and seeking meaning beyond material success. When he died in 1986, the New York Times called him one of the most ruggedly independent figures in American films. That independence wasn't a pose. It was the essence of a man who had commanded ships, fought behind enemy lines, written acclaimed books, and never made peace with Hollywood or, perhaps, with himself. Sterling Hayden brought to his film performances the hard-earned wisdom and moral complexity of a life lived on the edge. When he played tough men grappling with ethical dilemmas, he wasn't acting. He was drawing from the well of his own extraordinary experiences.
Down in Arizona, really?
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
You were there about 2 weeks younger, and they were sensational, the old lady guys.
2. Lee Marvin. When Lee Marvin snarled threats on screen, audiences instinctively believed him. That signature gravel voice intimidation wasn't the result of acting technique. It was the authentic product of a man who had seen the worst of combat and carried those experiences into every role he played. Born in New York City in 1924, Marvin was a troublemaker from the start. Expelled from multiple schools for bad behavior, he seemed destined for a life of drifting until the Marine Corps gave him direction and nearly took his life. Marvin enlisted in the Marines in 1942 and was assigned to the 4th Marine Division. As a private first class, he participated in numerous island landings in the Pacific Theater, including the bloody Battle of Saipan in June 1944. During this campaign, his unit was caught in a Japanese ambush. Most of his company was killed. Marvin was seriously wounded by machine gun fire that severed his sciatic nerve. The injury would leave him with a slight limp for the rest of his life. He spent 13 months in naval hospitals recovering and was eventually given a medical discharge with the rank of corporal. He would carry shrapnel in his body for the rest of his life. Those wartime experiences profoundly shaped Marvin as both a man and an actor. "I know what it's like to be in fear for your life," he once said. "I know what it's like to see good friends die violently at a young age. This wasn't theoretical knowledge from a script or an acting exercise. It was lived experience that gave his screen performances an authenticity other actors could only simulate. After drifting through various jobs as a plumber's assistant, surveyor, and salesman, Marvin stumbled into acting when working as a handyman at a community theater. His first significant film role came in The Big Heat, 1953, where he memorably played a sadistic gangster who throws scalding coffee in Gloria Graham's face. It established Marvin's screen persona as a man capable of casual, shocking violence, something he understood from first-hand experience. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Marvin specialized in playing villains and tough guys, bringing an unnerving authenticity to each role. Director Samuel Fuller, himself a decorated World War II veteran, recognized a kindred spirit in Marvin and cast him in several films, including The Big Red One, 1980, based on Fuller's own war experiences. Marvin's career reached new heights in the mid-1960s with films like The Killers, 1964, The Professionals, 1966, and The Dirty Dozen, 1967. In these roles, he projected a particular kind of hard-bitten authority that came from genuine experience rather than affectation. His performance in Cat Ballou, 1965, as a dual role, playing both a notorious gunfighter and his washed-up alcoholic twin brother, won him an Academy Award for Best Actor. In his acceptance speech, Marvin demonstrated the matter-of-fact humility of a man who had seen real heroism on the battlefield. "I think half of this belongs to a horse somewhere out in the valley," he said, referring to the scene-stealing drunk horse that contributed to the film's comedy. Off-screen, Marvin was known for his hard drinking and occasionally combative behavior, but colleagues consistently described him as professional and surprisingly thoughtful on set. Director John Borman, who worked with Marvin on Point Blank, 1967, said, "Lee had a very strong creative imagination. He brought elements to the character that weren't in the script. He understood the character in a way I couldn't have." What set Marvin apart from other tough guy actors was his unflinching understanding of real violence, its randomness, its consequences, and its moral ambiguity. He had no romantic illusions about combat or killing. In an interview about The Dirty Dozen, Marvin observed, "I know what it's like to be a killer. I know what it's like to have a rifle and know you're going to get that man over there who doesn't even know you. I think it would surprise people what guys who've been on the front lines are really like." This psychological insight gave Marvin's performances a depth that transcended the typical action hero. Whether playing heroes, villains, or morally ambiguous characters, he brought a weathered wisdom to each role, the hard-earned knowledge of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and survived to tell the tale. Lee Marvin's toughness wasn't just physical, it was existential. The resilience of someone who had faced death and developed a clear-eyed understanding of life's fragility and violence. When he told an interviewer, "I learned to act by watching men die," he wasn't being melodramatic. He was stating a brutal truth that informed every moment of his unforgettable screen presence.
Well, sir, I asked for a combat outfit. I don't want anything else.
Just a couple years older than you, I quit to go in the Marines back when we was in the big war.
1. Audie Murphy. At the top of our countdown is a man whose real-life heroism was so extraordinary that Hollywood literally couldn't make it up if they tried. In fact, when Audie Murphy played himself in the film adaptation of his autobiography, To Hell and Back, the filmmakers actually had to tone down his actual wartime exploits because they feared audiences wouldn't find the truth believable. Born in 1925 to sharecroppers in rural Texas, Murphy's childhood was defined by grinding poverty. His father abandoned the family, and his mother died when he was a teenager, leaving Murphy to help raise his younger siblings. Undersized at 5 feet 5 inches and 110 pounds, he seemed an unlikely warrior. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Murphy, then 16, tried to enlist, but was rejected by both the Marines and paratroopers for being too small and too young. Determined to fight, he enlisted in the Army in June 1942, lying about his age. After basic training, he was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, which would see some of the most intense combat of the European theater. Murphy fought in Sicily, Naples, Rome, southern France, and finally Germany, participating in 9 major campaigns over 3 years of frontline combat. What Murphy accomplished during this time defies belief. By the war's end, he had been awarded every American combat decoration for valor available at the time, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and numerous other recognitions. He was credited with killing over 240 enemy soldiers and wounding or capturing many more. The action that earned him the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, reads like something from an over-the-top action movie. On January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France, Murphy's company was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry. Already wounded, Murphy ordered his men to retreat to the woods while he remained forward at his command post. He then climbed aboard a burning tank destroyer, which could have exploded at any moment, and used its .50 caliber machine gun to hold off the German infantry. For over an hour, he single-handedly fought off the advancing forces, killing or wounding at least 50 Germans. When he finally ran out of ammunition, he organized a counterattack despite being wounded in the leg. For this incredible display of courage, he received the Medal of Honor at age 19, making him one of the youngest recipients in history. When the war ended, Murphy returned home a reluctant hero. Struggling with what we now recognize as severe PTSD, he slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow and battled nightmares, insomnia, and mood swings. After the war, they took army dogs and rehabilitated them for civilian life, Murphy once observed, but they turned soldiers into civilians immediately and let them sink or swim. His entry into Hollywood was almost accidental. Actor James Cagney saw Murphy's photo on the cover of Life magazine and invited him to Hollywood. Murphy's early roles were small, and many doubted the soft-spoken Texan had any acting talent, but he persevered, eventually starring in over 40 films, primarily westerns and war movies. When Universal Studios decided to adapt Murphy's 1949 autobiography To Hell and Back, he initially resisted playing himself, believing it would seem like self-promotion. He finally agreed, and the 1955 film became Universal's highest-grossing movie until Jaws 20 years later. The extraordinary aspect of Murphy's Hollywood career is that while he was playing heroes on screen, audiences had no idea that his actual wartime heroics far exceeded anything in his films. As director John Huston noted, Audie had been to hell and back, and that's what makes his performance so effective. He knows. Despite his success, Murphy struggled throughout his life with the psychological aftermath of combat. He became dependent on sleeping pills, battled gambling problems, and was known to have a hair-trigger temper. He spoke candidly about his struggles at a time when combat trauma was poorly understood and rarely discussed, making him one of the first high-profile advocates for what we now call PTSD awareness. In trying to maintain the feeling that nothing ever happened to me, I almost forgot the feeling of fear, Murphy once said about his post-war struggles, and I never want to lose that, the feeling that it could happen to anyone. Murphy's life ended tragically in 1971 when the private plane in which he was a passenger crashed into a mountain near Roanoke, Virginia. He was just 45 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, where his grave is one of the most visited, second only to President John F. Kennedy's. What sets Audie Murphy apart from every other tough guy in Hollywood history is the sheer scale of his proven courage under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. He wasn't playing at being a hero. He was one, having demonstrated a level of valor that few humans in history have matched. When he brought that quiet intensity to the screen, it wasn't acting technique, but the genuine presence of a man who had looked death in the face repeatedly and somehow lived to tell the tale. As his epitaph states, Murphy truly was American soldier, and there has never been a tougher man to grace the silver screen.